are so many roads left. Relax, take it easy. There's nothing that we can't relax, take it easy. Baby, don't be relax, take it easy. There's nothing that we can't relax, take it easy. the sea, I'm breathing alive. Where are you now? Where are you now? Under the bright but faded lights, you set my heart on fire. Where are you now? Where are you now? Where are you now? Under the sea, under the sea. get stronger when you get older. Just don't shrug your shoulders when you get older. The things aren't easy, so just believe me now. If you don't keep it cool now, you'll never make a sound. All the lights will guide the way. got cherry lips, angel eyes. She knows exactly how to tantalize. She's out to get you, danger by design. Cold-blooded vixen, she don't compromise. She's something mystical and colored lights. So far from typical, but take my advice. Before you play with fire, do think twice. And if you get burned, don't be surprised. Got me lifted, drifting higher than the ceiling. Ooh, baby, it's the ultimate feeling. You got me lifted, feeling so gifted. Sugar, how
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program is about to begin. أيها السيدات والسادة، سيبدأ البرنامج بعد قليل، لذا نرجو منكم التكرم بالجلوس في مقاعدكم. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program is about to begin. أيها السيدات والسادة، سيبدأ البرنامج بعد قليل، لذا نرجو منكم التكرم بالجلوس في مقاعدكم.
Broken train with nobody I know, but the pain and the longing's the same when you're dying. Now I'm lost and I'm screaming for help. Take it easy. There is nothing that we can't lose. Take it easy.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program is about to begin. أيها السيدات والسادة، سيبدأ البرنامج بعد قليل، لذا نرجو منكم التكرم بالجلوس في مقاعدكم.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to this lecture today. Today's lecture will be moderated by Ed Sleiman, who is the head of special projects and former head of information security at KAUST, with previous responsibility for managing the university and city cybersecurity function, as well as capacity building with focus on diversity and inclusion in cybersecurity. He has over 38 years of experience in the IT industry. Prior to joining KAUST, Ed worked in security program management, executive management, and deployment of country-scale security management systems at several companies, including Science Applications International Corporation, Informabili, the Auckland Corporation, and CACI, among others. Notable is his almost a decade as the Chief Information Security Officer at KAUST. He's a frequent keynote speaker, panel moderator, panelist, and/or review board member at numerous cybersecurity and risk management conferences, and his claim to fame in the Human Firewall program. In addition, he serves as an advisory board member for world-leading cybersecurity companies. He was recently honored with the CISO of the Year Award for his contributions to the cybersecurity field. Ed received various degrees, the last out of which is a PhD ABD in software engineering from George Washington University back in 2014. He is also the recipient of 5 CISO awards and holds more than a dozen professional certifications in the field. Please join me in welcoming Ed to the stage.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm sure you're all familiar with the human firewall. This is a very long introduction for someone who's going to be on the stage for 2 minutes to introduce our main speaker. So without further ado, let me introduce to you our next speaker, who's coming from overseas. Actually, Michael is a friend also, but Michael has completed his undergraduate and graduate degrees in computer science and physics at none but MIT. While there, he founded an electronic medical records company and later served as Chief Technology Officer of the acquiring organization. Michael then devoted a year to teaching undergraduate and graduate computer science courses as a visiting instructor at Miami University, but in Ohio, before relocating to Silicon Valley, where all the technology is invented these days, where he led the information security program at SRI International in Menlo Park for the next 11 years. Then Michael joined Stanford University in 2012 and ascended to the Assistant Vice President and Chief Information Security role in 2013, adding the Chief Privacy Officer role in 2018. After 10 years at Stanford, Michael was appointed as Harvard University's Chief Information Security and Data Privacy Officer in 2022, where he leads the digital accessibility in addition to the university's pioneering PrivSec program. Today, Michael serves on several advisory boards providing cybersecurity and privacy expertise. Let's give him a warm welcome. It's his first time in the Middle East and at KAUST.
Thank you. Thank you, Ed. Thank you. Well, it's great to be here. Continuing on our theme of cybersecurity today, we're going to take a journey together into the future, all the way to 2050. And we're going to try to predict what's going to happen between now and then. Okay, but before we hop into our time machine, I want to share a little bit of my career journey with you. This is going to sound very similar to what you just heard, but this time with a map, and maybe even a little choreography along with it. So I was born and raised in a rural area of the US, and then I made my way to, I'm walking this way, made my way to MIT for my undergrad and graduate years. Then I returned back to the Ohio area to teach cybersecurity at Miami University. And then I followed my dream to live and work in Silicon Valley, kind of the heart of the technology world. And that's where I went to Stanford Research Institute, which, by the way, is the birthplace of the computer mouse and the recipient of the first internet transmission ever. I then went on to Stanford University. I was there leading cybersecurity and privacy for 10 years. And then Harvard came calling, and I made my way to Cambridge, Massachusetts. Do you notice a trend here? I've always been drawn to higher ed. And it's because of that noble mission of generating and disseminating knowledge. And by the way, you get to work with a lot of brilliant people, and you're surrounded by innovation. So when I got the opportunity to visit KAUST, this bright beacon in the world of applied science and technology, I left. Meanwhile, back at Harvard, on the other side of the globe, we are leading a movement. We are taking the progressive approach of combining privacy and security into a single program where they can act in concert and on equal footing. And we're calling it PrivSec. I'm convinced that this is the model of the future because privacy and security, they are highly overlap, they complement each other, and they're increasingly inseparable. So that's what we're doing at Harvard. And let's go on to back to the future, back to 2050. Let's start by envisioning what the world is going to look like about a quarter century from now. All right, let's see what the future has in store for us. Well, for starters, autonomous vehicles are ubiquitous. So imagine this, you wake up, you decide you're going to visit a friend, and it's a few hours drive away. So you get into your car, you program the destination, and then you fall asleep, right? And you feel perfectly comfortable doing that because autonomous cars have been proven to be 100 times safer than having a human driver, right? And now, again, we're in 2050, you think back and you think, wow, back in the mid-2020s, children born in those years never needed to learn how to drive. And by the way, it's so safe, you no longer need to wear a seatbelt. Okay? But why drive when you can fly? Drone-like aircraft will be common sights above cities, taking people from here to there, and very much like their four-wheeled counterparts on the ground, they're unbelievably safe and secure. Need quantum computing? We've got plenty. You can now purchase as a basic Amazon service for pennies per minute of QPU time. And you recall, thinking back over the last couple decades, when we reached the milestones of 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, and ultimately 1 million stable qubits. That transformed the computing capabilities in the world, leading to staggering results, especially in the field of pharmaceutical research. Ever wanted to visit the moon? You can do it for a small fortune. There's a permanent colony on the moon at this point with weekly trips back and forth. You can spend a week or two there. And by the way, it's very popular with stargazers. I heard the view is amazing from the moon. Surprisingly, our colony on Mars is actually larger and growing. More than 500 brave souls have now made the long trip to the next planet. Now, once you're there, you're signed up for a couple years. You're going to be there for a couple years, right? And but yeah, you can begin a family there, whatever suits your needs. Back here on Earth, it's becoming increasingly common to have a humanoid robot helper at your home. Now, initially, this was only available to the very wealthy. But now, the price has come down so much that it's pretty much everyone has one. These robots have superhuman intelligence, strength, and dexterity. And they can do a wide variety of tasks. They can do your dishes, they can garden for you, they can even babysit your children, and maybe later help your children prepare for their college entrance exams. In fact, nowadays you can't imagine life without your robot helper at home. This is what an increasingly large portion of our population, this is how they spend their day, in virtual reality. They're working, they're socializing, they're gaming, they're consuming entertainment. But one of the big concerns these days is that some of these people are actually spending most of their lives exclusively in this artificial environment, to the point that they kind of lost the ability to interact with other humans. Like maybe once a year they'll come out and interact with people. Those who are not wearing VR goggles all day, maybe at the end of the day, they're done with work, and they want to sit down, they want to take in a movie. But remember, this is 2050. So they sit down and say, I'd like to watch a movie starring Tom Cruise and Michelle Yeoh, and I'd like it to be about an hour and a half long, action movie, with lots of plot twists in there. And by the way, make the soundtrack by Hans Zimmer. About 30 seconds later, your tailor-made movie starts. And guess what? You may be the only person to ever watch this movie because it was custom-made just for you. Later that weekend, you're like, I kind of miss my mom. So you go to the computer and you start talking to your mom. You're sharing what's going on with your life and getting some advice from her. That would be unremarkable, except your mom died 10 years ago. So you are talking to an artificial intelligence imprinted with her essence. After she passed, you engaged a service that took tens of thousands of pictures and videos from her that you had compiled over the many years, all throughout her life. Every email that you've ever exchanged, every email that she ever received, every writing she ever did, everything about her, and they ingest that, and they create this thing that you can interact with. And finally, in 2050, you will have the option to have a neural implant that gives you direct access by thinking to the internet and artificial intelligence capabilities. You can go further. You can get artificial organs. You can have superhuman strength, which, taken together, many view as an abomination. Others view as the next stage in human evolution. So that's a glimpse of our world in 2050. But let's reflect for a moment. What do all these amazing things have in common? They rely on digital technology, computers and software. And what that means is that in 2050, we will be more reliant on technology than we have ever been, far more than we were way back in 2024. And because of that, we are especially vulnerable to cyber incidents. And when there is an incident, it has more impact. So let's talk about cyber incidents. We're going to try to make some predictions here on how cyber incidents evolve between, we're going to go all the way back to 1990 to today, and then to 2050. All right? So starting back in 1990, that's when cyber incidents really started to take off, when people were beginning to use the internet, the web started, and we had viruses appearing for the first time at scale. And then we get up to the mid-2000s, and then it starts to slope up a little bit. Because why? Phishing. That's when phishing really started to take off. And then a little bit later, add ransomware into the mix. Well, that brings us up to current time. Then something happened around 2023. I'm trying to remember. Some little thing called artificial intelligence. And then the slope increased even further. By the mid-2030s, things are getting pretty bad. But something interesting happens. Around 2035, it starts to level off. And then something miraculous happens. After 2040, it drops back down all the way to pre-1990 levels. So what's happening here? Why am I predicting this? What's going on? To answer that, we need to think about what are the sources of cyber risk at a fundamental level. Well, number one, we talked about it a little bit already, there's this growing reliance on computer systems. And software today has essentially a limitless number of vulnerabilities in it. There's organized crime that will take advantage of these vulnerabilities. Humans are prone to error. We're also prone to influence. There are hacking toolkits available that make hacking available to just about anyone in the world. And now nation states are getting involved, right? So that raises the stakes. And finally, there's increased volume of data and devices that expands the attack surface. And last but not least, the number one contributor to cyber risk, the ability to make money. That's the number one driver. Today, 95% of all incidents are financially motivated. Okay, so now we understand the sources of risk in cybersecurity a little bit better. But what happens when you take these risks in their totality? Well, we see that our digital world is actually pretty fragile. And what happens when you combine fragility and dependency? You get catastrophe. Right? And we know that cybersecurity, we know that technology today is very brittle, as evidenced by the number of incidents we see every day. And it's so easy to cause an incident if you were so inclined to do that. And I predict, given that the risks are increasing, the amount of devices that we have, the data, all these risks that we just talked about, that the probability of catastrophes increases. And in fact, I predict that we will have multiple global cyber catastrophes between now and 2050. And that's even more likely if things stay the same. So I think we've all heard before that cybersecurity is so dynamic, it's this incredibly dynamic field, and that is true at the surface level. But if you look deeper, you realize that fundamentally, cybersecurity has not changed in the last 50 years. We are still today dealing with the same fundamental issues that have plagued the world for a half a century. To me, sometimes that's a little discouraging, right? So you might ask the question, well, Michael, why would you think, given that things have been the same this long, why would you think that it would change now? Why is today any different? And it's because today, we finally have the capabilities we need to solve, once and for all, the long-standing cybersecurity problems that have been troubling us all these years. But let's zoom out for a minute and let's think about the problem that we're trying to solve. It's really interesting if you reformulate the problem of cybersecurity in terms of economics, right? From the adversary's point of view. So here we've got this simple graph. On the x-axis is the effectiveness of a cyber threat, and the y-axis is the cost to the adversary. So over on the bottom right would be threats that are very effective and very low cost. So I bet you're all starting to think about what what are some examples of things that would be on this graph right now? And let's just put one to get us started. The most effective and least cost cyber threat there is phishing. And that's why it is the precursor to just about every incident we see these days, just about. And I'm just going to put a few more in here. Vulnerability exploits, credential stuffing. Those are still in that bottom right-hand corner. Now, what would be kind of further up on the other side? Well, that would be things like cracking cryptography keys, or even physically stealing a device. That's not easy to do. You have to be near the person, and you have to actually take their device. So that's actually quite a high cost, if you think about it this way. So when we think through this and look at this graph and think about it as an economics problem, the solution suddenly becomes clear. Although, we'll say that it's clear and easy in theory. And the solution is we have to push these threats up into that top left-hand corner. Because up in that corner, there is a threshold where the return on investment for the adversary is negative. It's costing them more, and it's not worth their effort. I mean, if you could make up some numbers, maybe they have to spend $100 of their time and resources to get $1 from you. Whereas today, it's completely opposite. The adversary might spend $1 and on average get $100. That's the solution. Like I said, easier said than done, but it's important. We'll talk about this some more. All right, let's transport ourselves back to 2050 and think about cybersecurity in 2050 with everything that we talked about in mind. Well, I feel like we have to start with passwords, our long-standing nemesis in cybersecurity. Well, you'll be happy to know in 2050, passwords are a thing of the distant past. No one uses passwords anymore. We're completely passwordless. Everyone uses things they call now passkeys. Right? In fact, you and your friends can't remember the last time you used a password. And you also remember that sometime around the year 2035 was when passwords were pretty much, by then they were pretty much eradicated. All the companies, all the services that you use were all using passkeys, right? Much safer. That's passwords. And because of that, phishing began to decline. Because the number one purpose of phishing is to get your password. That's not the only reason, but that's one of the primary reasons. But around that time, artificial intelligence began to get very good at detecting phishing messages. So you got rid of the password problem, and by the way, you've got this personal artificial intelligence assistant that watches every email, every text message. It actually listens to your phone calls, and if a phone call turns into a scam, it ends the call. So phishing disappears. The number one threat in the world of cybersecurity ends sometime around 2035. Our identities in 2050, they're assigned your digital identity is assigned at birth. And it's essentially a passkey that's associated with some sort of government ID number and maybe your name or some other basic information. And that one identity you use everywhere. Gone are the days that you had to create a separate username, password, passkey, whatever, for every service you use, Google, Amazon, everything. You don't do that anymore. You have one identity. And that just greatly simplifies this problem of identity and access management, because now you're just managing who is authorized to access what. Right? So that's a game changer. In 2050, no company has any equipment on premise except for networking equipment. Everything is running in the cloud. Everything. How does that help us? Because now you don't have a million different organizations around the world having to secure all these devices and systems that they're running at their organization. Let the folks in the cloud who are much better equipped and funded and trained to protect these things for us. Now let's think about, for a moment, the fact that minimizing attack surface is the name of the game in cybersecurity. And in 2050, every system you use will be architected to be serverless, meaning that there's not a bunch of servers sitting around waiting for a request, right? So let's just really quickly review the evolution of cloud computing over the years. And it began with everything being on-prem, the whole stack, your physical equipment, all the software, everything. And as a company, or let's say it's Kaust, you have to protect all of that, every bit of it. Well, what I'm calling Cloud 1.0, this happened maybe starting in the mid 2000s and continued on. Infrastructure as a service became a thing. And in that case, you let the cloud company like Amazon or Google or Microsoft, you let them do all the physical part. Let them handle the networking and the storage and the data center. So you don't have to worry about it. So now you've transferred a lot of risk to them, and you've narrowed your attack surface. What I'm calling Cloud 2.0, platform as a service, these cloud companies began providing platforms like a database. Oh, you want a database? We'll run a database for you. No problem. We got that. And then the part you really just had to take care of is some of the code that goes on top of all this. And then you had some responsibility for the operating system. And finally, what I'm calling Cloud 3.0 is the move to serverless, where the only thing you have to do is maintain a very narrow sliver of code. We usually refer to as low code. That way, your attack surface is as small as it can get at that point. Quantum computing. Well, you might think, wow, wouldn't have this been a problem, Michael? You know, we're in 2050. Wow, that must have been one of the catastrophes you were talking about earlier. Interesting not. In fact, we avoided a catastrophe here because we anticipated what was going to happen. Now, keep in mind, today, our world depends heavily on encryption. If something happened in a short period of time that threatened our ability to encrypt and have confidential transactions, the global economy would collapse overnight. Simple as that. Because you couldn't do transactions over the internet. Well, fortunately, we were made aware in 2030 that, hey, world, you've got about 5 years to prepare for quantum. We see it coming. The stable qubits are growing. We're able to factor some pretty large numbers, and pretty soon it's going to threaten your encryption keys. So that, combined with some requirements from our governments to use quantum-safe encryption, everyone did it. It was like the Y2K problem. There was a finite amount of work, and we did it. So that's the story on quantum computing. AI. Is that our friend or is it our foe? It's both. So AI is very interesting this development, the good thing about AI is it poses a problem and it also poses its own solution. And in this case, AI is going to be the key to overcoming and turning the tide on the adversaries. At first, in those first years, you remember when it started ramping up till 2035, steeper? That's because initially AI is going to benefit the adversaries more than the friends. Better fish. It starts to analyze source code and look for zero-day vulnerabilities. Those are vulnerabilities that no one else knows about. You tell your AI, your ChatGPT, to go find a bunch of vulnerabilities and some code that you found in GitHub. Like, oh, I found some. Okay, I'm going to exploit those. That's what's going to be happening over the next, say, 10 years. But later, we talked about that personal AI assistant. That's going to help us. That's going to help avoid some of these problems. But most of all, AI is going to allow us to reach a point where we have vulnerability-free code. So you're going to remember in 2050, you're going to think back all the way to 2023 and like, wow, wasn't that amazing that I could feed code into this thing called ChatGPT and tell it, hey, please identify the vulnerabilities in this following code and fix it. And it would do it, right? It's amazing. And then, not too much longer, not too much later, you could do something like this. Fix all the vulnerabilities. This will happen. This is one way that AI will save us. So I mentioned earlier, dependency times fragility equals a catastrophe. So in 2050, we're going to think back, we're going to be very sad to remember around 2040, this thing that we knew could happen, but we hoped it wouldn't. And that is the first mass casualty attributed to a cyber attack. 10,000 people dead worldwide. And it's because even though we had this capability with AI to get rid of vulnerabilities, well, as you can imagine, some companies were more proactive than others. We all remember the celebration when Google and Apple and Amazon and others announced that they were vulnerability free. But again, others lagged behind, and unfortunately in this case, one of those was a provider of software for medical devices. When the attack came, it affected these medical devices, and again, 10,000 people around the world died. By the way, as an aside, if you like cybersecurity and you like reading about science fiction, there's a great book written in 2012 called Robopocalypse, and it's a realistic cautionary tale about AI gone awry. And it's also eerily prescient. So it's kind of predicting some of the things that are going on these days. But anyway, we had that major incident, terrible incident, first mass casualty incident. By the way, you recall, it was actually 20 years prior, roughly, back in 2020, in a hospital in Germany was the first human casualty attributed to a cyber incident. And there have been many onesie-twosies since then, but that was the first one in 2020. Well, there was such public outcry, how could this happen? How could we let this happen? Well, the thing we know about catastrophes is catastrophes catalyze change. And in this case, the international community said, look, we are now going to require all software to be vulnerability free. If you provide a service online, you sell software, anything, you must be certified vulnerability free. Again, that's that point where we start to see the dramatic decline after 2040. In 2050, we look back and we're like, wow, remember those days when we had to sit through cybersecurity training? Like once a year, maybe an hour worth of cybersecurity training. You try to get everyone to understand what phishing was and all these risks and everything. We don't have to do that anymore in 2050. Security is built in. We've eliminated a lot of the threats. AI has allowed us to automate the protection that we enjoy. So here's our chart again. Between now and 2035, that increase is all but guaranteed. That's going to happen. In other words, things are going to get much worse. But if we're able to apply these new capabilities the way we should, we can turn the tide and bring it down, solve the problem basically. The shape of that curve is entirely dependent on the timing and magnitude of two competing forces. On one side, we have cyber risks. On the other side, we have the mitigations for those risks. So when you measure those two, you're basically measuring what's called residual risk, the difference between those. When it's balanced, you have some baseline level of cyber incidents. When it's tipped towards the risk side, you have more incidents. And then if you can somehow tip it towards the mitigation side, meaning your mitigations are very effective and outweighing the risks, your incidents come down. So that's really what we're trying to do. And again, I summarized some of the mitigations over here that we talked about today that are going to be really important in doing this. So I want to thank you for going on this little journey with me into the future of cybersecurity. I hope and I believe that 2050 will actually be relatively quiet in the world of cybersecurity. And that's good because that means that we have succeeded in our quest. Today, for the first time in history, we finally have the capabilities we need to solve the long-standing problems in cybersecurity. It will not happen overnight. It will not be easy. There's a lot of work ahead of us. But we can, we must, and we will prevail because the survival of human civilization depends on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Excellent speech. It was very intriguing. I learned a lot. I hope I won't live till 2050 to see that happen. But
it's supposed to be an optimistic outlook, ultimately.
Exactly. So I'd like to start the Q&A session. We have some time for questions. I'd like the audience, we have 2 microphones on either side, both of these rows. So please come up to the microphone and ask your question to
Mr. Michael. Thank you for the speech and welcome to Chaos and Saudi in general.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Great presentation. You took us to 2050 in less than an hour, so that's great to hear. I'm curious to know, phishing has been well known for quite some time now, and there hasn't been an effective solution yet besides raising social awareness about these issues. Why so, considering that technology has been developing so fast and also implementing in societies?
So I missed the last part of your question.
Yeah, why there has not been a solution effective for resolving phishing, even though it has been well known for quite some time now?
Yeah, that's exactly the point. Well, because not until recently have we had a passwordless solution. Actually, the solution has been there all along. It just wasn't practical. So a few years ago at Stanford, I took Stanford passwordless. And there was a big phishing, this is just recent news, there was a big phishing campaign there. And you know, I understand from my successor. And guess which accounts were compromised? Only the ones that had exceptions from passwordless. So it protected, it was 100% effective. So pass keys, that's the replacement for passwords, they fixed the password phishing problem, 100%. As I mentioned earlier, that's not the only kind of phishing there is. You might get a phishing message that just tries to convince you to send money, right? That's where it's going to take a few more years for artificial intelligence to understand all the messages that you send and receive, who you talk to, and say, that's an odd request. Let's not do that. So to answer your question, it's because even if the technology in terms of the pass keys was there, it wasn't adopted. So we must adopt these new capabilities, and we're going to see AI come to our help here. Yeah. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you so much for the lovely presentation. I loved it. It's very utopia, if you think about it, if we lived as a one global world. But the reality is we have different global competitors, and how do you justify that with 2050 with global countries competing for these technologies?
Excellent question.
Yeah, very good question. And it's a very nuanced question. So I want to think through this for just a moment. What I posed here are some scenarios that I really do think would trigger a united international response, right? Like if there were a global calamity that affected pretty much every country on the planet, I think that would be one time, possibly in the history of humankind, that everyone would come together and say, look, we need a solution. We need a law that spans the entire world. And I gave the example of vulnerability-free code. Now, I think there's plenty of room for competition in here. There's nothing that says you must use one certain passkey solution over another. Might be nice, but nothing, either way you get the benefit of passkey. So I think we can realize a lot of the benefit of what we just talked about, even though there may be competing companies and countries involved, because everyone's working towards the same, everyone's applying these same techniques, these same fundamental capabilities. So I don't think ultimately that competition will be a detriment. Who knows, it might even help, might even accelerate the innovation. It's possible.
Any other questions? Yeah. Yes, we have two more.
Okay.
Yeah, very insightful talk. Thank you so much. I want to ask, what do you expect to happen with hardware vulnerabilities and, kind of that infinite regress where you can exploit the level of protection that you implement and the level below it and so on?
Yeah, so for hardware vulnerabilities, it's an excellent question. One thing that I know is true, they just, when you put them on a scale of the commonality, hardware vulnerabilities are actually very low.
Yeah.
Like, compare, how often do you see hardware vulnerabilities versus phishing today, or software vulnerabilities? A large gap. So I think you're absolutely right. And what I think, what you kind of are bringing up here is, which is a truth that we always see in cybersecurity, that once you fix a problem, well, the adversaries just go to the next one, and they try to exploit that. And maybe, I kind of hope, we get to that point where the only thing left they can exploit are hardware vulnerabilities. That would be, I think, we'd be in a good position at that point. It also, as I think you know, is kind of difficult to fix hardware problems, hardware vulnerabilities. But oftentimes you can with, like a firmware fix or even an OS fix. Sometimes can avoid a hardware problem. But I hope we see the day when those are the only remaining vulnerabilities, hardware. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your talk. It was really fascinating. It felt very sci-fi, but I hope it becomes science reality eventually. I want to ask on your take on creating artificial intelligence in the Terminator sense, like artificial conscience. Like, should we go for it? Is it a good idea? Is it even possible to? What is your take on creating this?
Yeah, I think I would say, let me start by saying I think it's inevitable.
Yeah.
I think even if there were a law against it, it will still happen. There is no doubt in my mind this will happen. And just imagine, we already know today that ChatGPT, in many respects, is smarter than any human who ever existed. So imagine coupling that with consciousness or your own intentions. That's kind of what that Robo-Apocalypse book is sort of about. If you like that kind of thing, that'd be a good read. Yeah, I think that would be a major. I'm kind of factoring that into my chart there, because I do think that's one of the reasons why things will become much worse than before they get better. And the key question, I guess I probably didn't do a good job, when I had the scale and the competing forces. If the risks far outweigh the mitigations, then we have a calamity, something that possibly could end human civilization.
All right. You could also read about the code name, actually Q-Star, which is the AGI from OpenAI that's coming up. So if you want to really read about conscience and artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
So we have a question there. Next.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, so thank you for the presentation. As we are progressing and developing, let's say, AI that can help us further our own cybersecurity in the future, but doesn't that also entails the progress of the cyber attacks and the adversaries and develop their methods? So even if, for example, we went passwordless, even cyber attacks could target the sources of, for example, let's say the passphrases or whatever, and then conduct their attacks. And even if we move further and create more dependency on the technology, that would also help the adversaries in conducting their own attacks. So is there maybe a different idea or approach to tackle this problem or challenge?
Well, that's very astute, because I've been thinking about that a lot myself. I don't have a great answer, but let me give one example for why I think AI can actually help us prevail. Let's think about software vulnerabilities. Okay, let's say we develop a very powerful artificial intelligence debugger, right? That will help us identify and fix the vulnerabilities in the code. Now, let's say someone comes along later and develops something 10 times as smart, 10 times as powerful AI. Well, in this case, it doesn't matter. You can reach zero. There is a limit, right? In the limit, if you have sufficiently powerful enough AI, you will find all vulnerabilities and fix them. So it doesn't matter what comes along later. It's not going to find any new vulnerabilities. Now that's a narrow example.
Yeah, as a follow-up, in security systems, there are a lot of times where sometimes the vulnerability is not even the code itself or the program itself, but also the human factor.
Yes.
So for instance, let's say we have developed a program that has been well secured by using this AI and fully debugged. If a human factor was introduced, it could also create a loophole or a hole in the security, and that would cause a catastrophic attack, for example, or something, even though we were able to debug against it.
Yeah, you're absolutely, and I agree 100%. You're right, and that is something that could throw off that balance. And so what we don't want to happen, and I really don't well, it's not sustainable. If that curve, that chart keeps going up, society ends, civilization ends.
All right. So we're out of time. I'm going to allow one more question, and then we're going to end it. So
Great question.
thank you very much. Yes, please.
My question is, so we have technology to detect lies, right? Can we submerge that in cybersecurity where, like, I don't know how, but has anyone ever thought of that, like detecting who's lying on, like signing on something?
Yeah, that's a great point. I hadn't thought of it like that, but I think that's a great way to think about it. I mean, deception, like detecting deception.
Right.
And that's why I think AI will be an important part of the phishing solution, because a lot of that is about deception. Like, hey, could you buy me some gift cards and take a picture and send them to me? Well, that's odd. Why would someone be asking me to do that? And it's that superhuman, kind of, they can see a lot more than we can, factor in a lot more considerations. I think you're absolutely right. That is a key to, particularly the phishing and social engineering threat. That's what we need.
All right, thank you.
All right, let's. We have no more time, Asad. We can ask him offline. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
We'll talk.
Yeah, we'll talk. So we know. So give it up to Michael, please. Thank you very much. Finally, we do have a gift that's presented by the WEP team to you.
Oh my gosh.
Please. Oh, we need it.
Oh wow. Look at that. Yes. Oh, that's amazing. Okay, good. Thank you, Ed. Yeah. In the middle? Okay, all right. Okay.